Imagine a world in ruins. It is 1944. The air is thick with the smoke of a collapsing old world. The great empires of Europe, the British, the French, the Dutch, are physically and financially shattered. They are the old money families who have gambled away their estates in a catastrophic war. In the middle of this chaos, 730 delegates from 44 nations gather in a grand hotel in the woods of New Hampshire, Bretton Woods. They aren't there to celebrate, they are there because they are terrified. They know that when the guns stop firing, the world will need a new heart. It will need a way to trade, a way to value things, and a way to prevent the total collapse of civilization. The British delegate is John Maynard Keynes, perhaps the most famous economist in history. He proposes a world currency, a neutral unit of account called the Bankrupt. It's a logical, fair idea. But across the table sits the American delegate, Harry Dexter White. He doesn't want logic. He has something better: leverage. While the rest of the world was burning, the United States was building. It owned 2/3 of the world's gold. It owned the factories. It owned the only intact navy of any consequence. White tells the world the truth they didn't want to hear. We don't need a world currency. We have the dollar. And the dollar is as good as gold. In that moment, the trap was set. The world didn't just adopt a currency. They adopted a system where the United States became the sun, and every other nation became a planet locked in its gravitational pull. This is the first reason the US can never go bankrupt. You cannot go bankrupt when you are the one who defines what value is. Bankruptcy requires an external standard. But the dollar is the standard. To understand why the ticking debt clock is a distraction, we have to look at what US debt actually is. In a household, debt is a burden. It's a weight that drags you down. If you owe $1 million, you are a slave to the lender. But in the global system, US debt is not a burden. It is a product. It is the most valuable commodity on earth. Think of the US Treasury bond. When the US government borrows money, it issues a piece of paper, a digital entry, promising to pay that money back with interest. In your mind, that's a loan. In the mind of a central bank in Tokyo or a pension fund in London, that piece of paper is risk-free collateral. The world's financial system is built on layers of trust. Banks lend to other banks. Corporations trade with other corporations. But they all need a foundation. They need an asset that they can all agree is safe. If a German bank wants to prove it has enough capital to stay open, it doesn't show a vault full of gold or stacks of euros. It shows a portfolio of US treasuries. This creates a paradox. The more the US spends, the more safe assets it creates for the rest of the world to use. The global economy actually demands that the US stays in debt. If the US were to pay off its debt tomorrow, to reach a balance of zero, the global financial system would seize up and die. There would be no more safe collateral to back up the world's trades. The US isn't spending beyond its means. It is supplying the world with the oxygen it needs to breathe. How do you go bankrupt when the world is literally begging you to print more of your debt so they have something safe to hold? It is the only bankruptcy in history where the creditors are terrified that the debtor might stop borrowing. Now let's talk about the grid. Most people think of the economy as a marketplace, a place where people buy and sell things. But it's actually a network, and the United States owns the servers. Every time a bank in Singapore sends money to a bank in Paris, that message usually travels through a system called SWIFT. And while SWIFT is technically a neutral cooperative based in Belgium, it runs on the dollar. If the US Treasury Department decides you are a bad actor, they don't need to send a single soldier to your border. They simply flip a switch. Suddenly you are deleted from the world. You cannot buy oil. You cannot sell your exports. Your currency becomes a useless piece of paper because it cannot be exchanged for the one thing everyone needs: dollars. This is financial hegemony. It is a power more absolute than any army. When nations like Russia or Iran are cut off from the dollar system, we see what real bankruptcy looks like. They have resources, they have people, they have gold, but they don't have the grid. The US can never go bankrupt because it is the gatekeeper. It is the person who decides who gets to participate in the 21st century. As long as the rest of the world wants to be part of the modern world, they have to respect the rules of the house. And the first rule of the house is that the house always has money. We are taught that investors are rational. They look for growth, for profit, for stability. But in times of true panic, investors are not rational. They are hunted animals looking for a cave. Imagine a global catastrophe. A pandemic, a war in the Middle East, or a banking crisis in China. What happens? In a logical world, if the crisis is big enough, people would sell everything. But they don't. They sell their local currencies, they sell their stocks, they sell their gold, and they buy US treasuries. This is the flywheel of fear. When the world gets more dangerous, the United States becomes more powerful. This is the ultimate cynical mechanism of the system. The US can print money, run massive deficits, and behave with total fiscal recklessness. And if that recklessness causes a global crisis, the world will respond by lending the US even more money at even lower interest rates. It is a self-correcting loop of power. The US is the only country that is rewarded for its own instability. Why? Because when the ship is sinking, you don't look for the most beautiful lifeboat, you look for the biggest one. And the US economy, backed by the US military, is the only lifeboat large enough to hold the world. We cannot talk about money without talking about steel. The dollar is not backed by gold. It hasn't been since 1971, when Richard Nixon officially ended the Bretton Woods arrangement. Many people thought that would be the end. They thought the dollar would collapse because it was backed by nothing. They were wrong. The dollar is backed by something much more reliable than a yellow metal sitting in a vault. It is backed by the US Navy. The global economy is built on trade. Trade requires that ships can move from one side of the planet to the other without being pirated, sunk, or blocked. For the last 80 years, the US Navy has guaranteed the freedom of the seas. When you buy oil from the Middle East, you pay in dollars. Why? Because in the 1970s, the US made a deal with Saudi Arabia. We will protect your kingdom and your oil fields with our military, and in exchange you will only sell your oil in dollars. This created a permanent, global demand for the US currency. Everyone needs energy, therefore everyone needs dollars. This is the petrodollar system. It means that the US can never run out of money because the world is forced to use its money to keep the lights on. If a country tries to move away from the dollar, if they try to sell oil in euros or yuan, they find themselves facing the security arm of the system. It's not a conspiracy, it's a structural reality. Power is a tripod. One leg is the currency. One leg is the grid. One leg is the military. You cannot break one without breaking them all. And as long as those three legs stand, the concept of US bankruptcy remains a mathematical impossibility. If you owe the bank $100, that's your problem. If you owe the bank $100 million, that's the bank's problem. The United States owes China, Japan, and dozens of other nations trillions of dollars. On paper, this looks like weakness. It looks like China owns America. But in reality, it's the other way around. China has spent decades building its economy by selling things to Americans. They take those dollars and because they have nowhere else to put them, they buy US debt. They are now the largest shareholders in the American experiment. If China were to foreclose on the US, if they tried to dump their debt and destroy the dollar, they would be blowing up their own wealth. They would be destroying their own best customer. Their own factories would go silent. Their own people would go hungry. The world's creditors are not lenders, they are hostages. They have tied their own prosperity so tightly to the American system that they cannot afford to let the US fail. They are like passengers on a plane who hate the pilot, but they have to keep him fed and awake because if he dies, the plane goes down with everyone on it. We are seeing headlines today about de-dollarization. We see BRICS nations talking about a new currency. We see gold prices rising. People think they are seeing the end. But look closer. When a nation wants to exit the dollar system, where do they go? Do they go to the Chinese yuan? A currency controlled by a government that can freeze your assets at any moment and doesn't allow money to flow freely out of the country? Do they go to the euro? A currency shared by 20 different countries with 20 different agendas and no central military? Do they go to Bitcoin? A digital asset that can lose 20% of its value in a single afternoon? The truth is there is no exit. The US system is like a casino where the doors are locked, and even if you win, you can only spend your winnings at the casino's shop. The US can never go bankrupt because it has no competitors. To have a bankruptcy, you need a liquidator, someone to take over the assets and run the business better. But there is no one else capable of running the global business. There is no other nation that can provide the safe haven, the military protection, the deep markets, and the legal transparency, however flawed, that the US provides. So, if the debt doesn't matter and the printing press is infinite and the world is a hostage, is there any danger at all? The danger isn't bankruptcy. The US will never have its house repossessed. The danger is irrelevance. A system this powerful doesn't break from the outside. It breaks from the inside. It breaks when the people inside the system, the Americans themselves, lose faith in the rules. It breaks when the language of the dollar becomes so confusing and so inflated that people stop using it to communicate. But even then, it won't be a bankruptcy. It will be a slow, grinding decline into a darker, more fragmented world. A world where trade stops being a game of chips and starts being a game of walls and borders. Until that day, the machine will keep humming. The numbers on the debt clock will spin faster and faster, and the pundits will scream louder and louder about the coming collapse. But the people who truly understand how the world works, the bankers in Zurich, the generals in the Pentagon, the oil ministers in Riyadh, they aren't panicking. They know that the US isn't a country. It's the infrastructure of the planet. And you don't fire the owner of the world just because his ledger is messy. You keep playing the game because it's the only game in town. Is the US stable because it's strong, or because everyone else has no alternative? The answer to that question is the only thing that actually matters. Thanks for watching. If you like this story, please support the channel with a like and subscribe so you don't miss any new videos. And if there's a topic you'd like me to cover, write it in the comments. I read everything.